In the quiet spaces where wilderness and human worlds collide, the fragile balance can shatter in an instant. What happens when nature's most powerful predators break through the fragile barrier between wilderness and human life? In this video, we will explore 6 harrowing encounters with bears, from grisly attacks on campers to a Kodiak bear boarding a fishing boat, a polar bear invading an Arctic outpost, and a black bear striking in a suburban backyard, each a tense, high-stakes battle for survival. The evening air in the dense taiga of eastern Russia was thick with humidity and the faint scent of crushed pine needles. A quiet stillness had settled over a small, isolated wooden cabin nestled at the forest's edge, far from any road or settlement. 4 friends from a nearby city, 2 couples bound by years of camaraderie, had chosen this remote location for a peaceful escape from the daily grind. Among them was Ivan, a quiet and cautious man, and his partner Alina, whose adventurous spirit had prompted the trip despite concerns about local wildlife. Dmitry and Yulia rounded out the group. The day had passed in easy contentment, hiking, fishing, and gathering wood for the fire. The forest surrounding the cabin was vast and primeval, with towering evergreens casting long shadows across the undergrowth. The air buzzed softly with the hum of insects, and bird calls echoed between the trees. There was no phone signal, no electricity, only the sounds of nature and the warmth of firelight when the sun began to set. By late evening, the golden glow of sunset and the day's fatigue drew 3 of them, Alina, Dmitry, and Yulia, into the steaming hot tub on the deck behind the cabin. The bubbling water shimmered beneath the rising moon, offering a false sense of comfort amid the remote wilderness. Ivan stepped inside briefly to retrieve drinks, trusting the quiet night and the perceived safety of the property's small clearing. But tranquility in wild places is often deceptive. From the forest's edge, a faint disturbance began, first a crackling twig, then the heavy shift of weight on damp earth. Something had caught the scent of people. Something large, drawn by the smells of food, sweat, and warm water. A massive grizzly had wandered into the clearing. The animal, accustomed to human presence after prior unreported encounters, had lost its natural fear. Now it was bold and hungry. The bear slipped from the shadows without a sound, its thick fur nearly blending into the night. It moved with a fluid power, paws leaving deep imprints in the soil. When it reached the edge of the deck, its presence was sudden and overwhelming. Towering above the hot tub, it stared down at the 3 figures in the water, nostrils flaring as it inhaled their scent. For an instant, everything froze. Then violence erupted. With a guttural roar, the bear lunged forward, smashing its weight into the tub. Water sprayed outward as it surged into the steaming pool, claws slicing through the surface and bodies alike. Alina was flung against the deck, her ribs slamming into the wooden boards. Dmitry tried to scramble free, but the bear was faster, crashing down on top of him. Yulia screamed and struck at the animal's thick hide, her efforts swallowed by chaos. The bear targeted Dmitry first. Its jaws clamped down with terrifying strength, and the water turned dark. Alina, dazed and bruised, crawled backward, trying to put distance between herself and the nightmare. But the bear struck again, its massive paw crashing into her side and sending her tumbling toward the stairs. Yulia tried to escape next, but the animal dragged her back with frightening ease. The entire attack lasted less than a minute, but to those caught in it, it seemed to stretch endlessly. The deck was left in ruins, water pooling, wood splintered, and the stillness that followed was heavy with finality. Inside the cabin, Ivan stood frozen, paralyzed by the screams that had pierced the night. He moved to the window, his heart pounding as he looked outside. He saw only the bear's retreating form disappearing into the tree line, something limp trailing behind it. He didn't move. Fear rooted him to the cabin floor. The door was too far, the animal too close. Every instinct screamed to act, but his body refused. Minutes passed in a breathless silence that felt eternal. Even after the bear had gone, Ivan remained hidden, too afraid to step outside. The only sounds were the dripping of water and the far-off rustling of leaves. As the night wore on, Ivan sat in darkness, unable to process what he had seen. Images flashed in his mind. The attack, the screams, the helplessness. When the faintest light of dawn began to creep across the forest floor, he forced himself to act. Stumbling out of the cabin, he moved through the brush in a daze, every step a battle against panic. The journey to the nearest ranger outpost took hours. Ivan was exhausted, dehydrated, and barely coherent when he arrived. He collapsed at the doorstep, barely able to speak. His story came out in fragments, broken, disjointed, but chillingly clear in its implications. Authorities who later examined the scene concluded that the bear had become dangerously accustomed to human activity. The region had seen a slow rise in tourism over the past few years, with minimal safety protocols and even fewer enforcement efforts. Campfires left unattended, food waste discarded carelessly, and hikers venturing too close to wildlife had all contributed to the animal's boldness. The tragedy reignited heated debate about wilderness safety in remote parts of eastern Russia. Officials called for stricter regulations, better signage, and more active monitoring of wildlife corridors, but the damage had already been done. Ivan's account became a stark warning about the thin boundary between civilization and nature, how quickly comfort can give way to chaos, how easily a quiet retreat can become a scene of devastation. Though he survived, the emotional toll remained. In the weeks and months that followed, he struggled with grief, guilt, and the recurring memories of that night. He would never forget the steam rising into the cold air, the roar that broke the silence, the weight of what had been lost. The friends who had laughed with him that morning were gone by nightfall, and in their place only silence remained. In the vast wilderness of the taiga, where humans are only visitors and the wild holds sway, one bear reminded the world that nature cannot be tamed, and sometimes it strikes without warning. The gray dawn broke over the cold waters off the northeast coast of Kodiak Island, casting a dull light that barely pierced the thick morning fog. The sea was calm, but a biting chill clung to the air, mixed with the briny scent of salt and fish. On a modest commercial fishing boat, two men were hard at work hauling heavy crab pots from the depths, the rhythmic thud of the traps hitting the deck punctuated by the creak of wet ropes and the steady slap of waves against the hull. The boat bobbed gently, about 400 yards from the rocky shoreline, far from the safety of land. Michael, a seasoned fisherman in his late 40s, had spent decades navigating these waters. His companion, Alex, younger but equally skilled, focused intently on the pots, their crab-filled cages clinking as they were lifted over the side. Both men wore thick, waterproof gear to protect against the cold spray, their faces weathered by years of exposure to the elements. It was routine work, but in the wilderness, even routine could turn dangerous. As they worked, a dark shape appeared in the water beyond the boat, moving steadily closer. At first, Michael assumed it was a seal or sea lion, both common in the area. But as the shape broke the surface and grew nearer, it revealed itself unmistakably, a young Kodiak bear, large and powerful even at a relatively early stage of life, swimming toward the boat with steady, deliberate strokes. Its thick fur was soaked and clung to its massive frame, and its head rose high above the waves, eyes fixed on the vessel. Michael exchanged a brief glance with Alex, but neither spoke. The bear was far from shore, and such behavior, while rare, was not unheard of. Curious or food-motivated bears had been seen swimming surprising distances before. The men kept working, expecting the animal to veer off, but it didn't. Instead, the bear continued closing the distance with unsettling resolve. Within minutes, it reached the stern of the boat and lifted its front paws onto the deck. Water poured from its body as it hoisted itself aboard, claws scraping across the wood. Its eyes, dark and steady, scanned the area. Just a few feet away sat a bucket filled with salmon waste, the pungent bait used for crab pots. The smell hung thick in the air, familiar and irresistible to the hungry animal. The bear sniffed once, then reached out and gripped the bucket in its powerful claws. Michael reacted on instinct. Grabbing a long gaff hook, he struck the bucket sharply in an attempt to scare the bear off, the loud crack echoing in the fog. But the bear didn't retreat. Instead, it lashed out with startling speed, one heavy paw swinging across Michael's torso. Its claws tore through his rain jacket and slashed into his forearm beneath. The pain was immediate, deep and searing. Michael stumbled backward, gripping his arm as blood began to soak the fabric. The bear dropped the bucket, then seized it again with its teeth and leapt back into the water, paddling away through the fog with its prize. Alex rushed to Michael's side, wrapping his arm with strips torn from a clean rag and applying pressure. The bleeding was heavy, but they managed to slow it. Michael's face was pale, his jaw clenched against the pain. They quickly radioed for help, transmitting their coordinates and a brief report of what had happened. As they waited for rescue, the boat drifted slowly toward shore. The atmosphere had changed. What had been a quiet morning was now heavy with tension. The only sounds were the occasional call of seabirds and the soft slap of water against the hull. Michael sat down near the edge of the deck, trembling from shock, his injured arm held close to his chest. Alex stayed close, scanning the water nervously, unsure if the bear might return. When the medics finally arrived by sea, Michael was stabilized and transported to a local clinic. Doctors cleaned and stitched the deep laceration, 23 stitches in all. The injury, while serious, wasn't life-threatening. But the encounter left more than just physical wounds. In the days that followed, wildlife officials visited the site and reviewed the incident. Based on the behavior, they suspected the young Kodiak bear had grown accustomed to scavenging around fishing docks and boats. Repeated access to human-related food sources likely conditioned it to approach vessels without fear. Such encounters, they warned, were becoming increasingly common and increasingly dangerous. Experts emphasized that bears who began associating boats with easy food posed a serious risk, not only to people but to themselves. Habituated animals often become aggressive or unpredictable, leading to tragic outcomes on both sides. Officials renewed calls for tighter controls around fish waste disposal and better education for those working along coastal waters. For Michael and Alex, the attack served as a sobering reminder of the fragile balance between people and the wild. Both had long respected the sea and the animals that shared it, but neither had expected the wild to board their boat so literally. The bear's eyes, the sudden movement, the weight of its strike, those images lingered well beyond the physical healing. Though Michael eventually returned to work, he remained more cautious than before, more attuned to the silence between waves and the shapes that might rise from the mist. The ocean hadn't changed, but something in him had. Out on the water, life resumed its rhythms. Crab pots were lowered, engines hummed, and gulls circled overhead. But somewhere beyond the fog, the wild still watched and waited. The remote airstrip in Russia's far eastern Amur region was a harsh, unforgiving place carved out of wilderness. Gravel and dirt stretched into the horizon, flanked by dense taiga forests that seemed endless and silent, broken only by the distant cry of unseen wildlife. In early May 2024, cold winds swept through the open clearing, cutting through the sparse infrastructure of the small cargo facility. Around the edge of the strip, rusty fuel drums and wooden crates filled with fish sat unsecured in the chill, leftovers from a recent delivery, permeating the air with a sharp, unpleasant odor. The outpost was isolated, manned by only a handful of workers. There were no nearby towns, no quick help, only forest, frost, and sky. Two ground technicians, Sergei and Pavel, spotted something unusual minutes before a cargo plane was scheduled to land. Near the runway's edge, where the crates and drums leaned against frost-bitten earth, a large male grizzly bear had appeared. The animal was pawing at the crates, drawn by the overwhelming scent of rotting fish. It moved slowly but with purpose, undeterred by the activity nearby. The workers exchanged looks of concern but hesitated. The bear was dangerously close to the active strip, but with little time and no safe means to force it away, their options were limited. Overhead, a cargo aircraft began its descent through the overcast sky. Inside the cockpit, the pilot, a veteran named Igor, monitored his instruments and scanned the clearing ahead. The landing was routine, but the strip was short and unforgiving. His cargo was heavy, and his margin for error was slim. Radio updates filtered in as he made his approach, but none warned him of the threat now prowling the airstrip below. On the ground, the technicians acted quickly. Sergei raised a flare gun and fired a warning shot into the air near the brush. The flare sizzled skyward, but the bear responded only with a low growl, baring its teeth as it glanced toward the distant workers. It did not retreat. As the plane dropped toward the runway, tension gripped the clearing. The bear lingered near the fuel drums, still nosing through the unsecured crates. Then, in a sudden burst of motion, it bolted. The Grizzly charged across the gravel strip with astonishing speed, its massive frame pounding the ground and kicking up stones and dust. Muscles rippled beneath its thick coat as it cut directly into the aircraft's path. In the cockpit, Igor saw it, a blur of movement, an enormous shape sprinting across the runway. Reflex took over. Igor yanked the control column back, pulling the plane's nose upward in a steep, urgent climb. The engines roared as the aircraft surged skyward, wheels brushing the gravel as they lifted just in time. The airframe shuddered under the strain, and Igor gritted his teeth as he steadied the climb, circling above in tight loops. Below, Sergei and Pavel scrambled to launch more flares. Their hands shook with adrenaline as the fiery signals hissed through the sky, landing in the underbrush with sharp flashes. Smoke and light filled the air as they tried to drive the bear back into the forest. The animal roared from the thicket, visible for moments through the haze, before retreating deeper into the trees. For 20 minutes, the cargo plane circled, engines thrumming over the clearing, while the ground crew continued their efforts. Finally, the bear vanished into the forest. Only the rustle of disturbed foliage remained as the towering shape disappeared behind the trees. With the runway cleared, Igor brought the plane around for a second approach. This time, the descent was smoother, and the aircraft touched down without incident. The wheels met gravel with a solid thud, and the plane rolled to a stop at the far end of the strip. Only then did the tension ease. The crew gathered around, breathless, eyes scanning the forest's edge. Relief mixed with exhaustion. The encounter had nearly ended in catastrophe, a fully loaded plane almost colliding with one of the region's most powerful predators. The event was immediately reported to aviation authorities, prompting an urgent investigation. Inspectors found serious safety lapses. Broken perimeter fencing allowed wildlife open access to the runway. Food waste and unsecured fish crates had created a lure no wild animal could ignore. The proximity of attractants to active aircraft operations posed a major risk. Aviation regulators ordered rapid changes. The fencing was repaired, and all food products were moved to locked storage well away from the strip. Regular patrols were mandated, as were wildlife deterrence drills using flares and alarms. The incident became a case study in wilderness aviation risk, a vivid reminder of what happens when human infrastructure overlaps with wild terrain without precaution. For Igor, the near miss left a deep impression. He could not forget the moment he saw the bear's shape cut across his landing path, the raw speed and force it carried, and the razor-thin window in which he reacted. That image stayed with him long after the aircraft was safely parked. The ground crew, too, was changed by the experience. Sergei and Pavel continued working at the facility, but their view of the taiga had shifted. They knew now that the forest didn't just surround the airstrip. It could breach it at any time. Their hands still trembled slightly when handling flare guns, their eyes lingering a little longer on the tree line. The incident also reignited debate about the challenge of operating in remote regions. Balancing human presence with the needs and instincts of wildlife is an ongoing struggle, particularly in vast, unmonitored environments like the Russian Far East. When humans bring food and noise into the wilderness, animals adapt, but not always in ways that align with safety. The grizzly was never seen again at the airfield, but its presence lingered like a shadow, powerful, unpredictable, and always just beyond the edge of the clearing. In places like this, nature's dominance is never far away, and sometimes it charges straight down the runway. The night in a remote wilderness area in Montana was thick and still, the kind of silence that presses on the ears and makes every sound feel louder than it should. Beneath a canopy of stars, two friends, Ben Hargrove and Leo Sandlin, lay inside their tent, miles from any road or trailhead. Both men were experienced outdoorsmen. Ben, in his early 30s, was strong and meticulous, with years of survival knowledge. Leo, quieter and more reserved, had a background in long-distance hiking and backcountry camping. They had done everything right, pitched camp properly, stored their food well away from the site, and followed every safety rule meant to keep them protected from the region's large predators. But in the wilderness, even strict preparation can falter. Just after midnight, the forest's stillness was shattered by the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush. Branches cracked, twigs snapped, and the thud of heavy footfalls moved closer. A massive grizzly bear, drawn by the scent of human presence and food, approached with little hesitation. Ben and Leo froze inside the tent. The bear didn't pause. With terrifying strength, it ripped into the campsite, tearing through the nylon tent in seconds. Poles snapped, fabric shredded. The air filled with the brutal noise of destruction. Ben never had a chance to react. The bear lunged onto him instantly. In one swift, violent movement, the bear's jaws clamped down. The weight and force crushed him beneath the collapsed shelter. The attack lasted only seconds, but its impact was final. Leo, pinned beneath broken tent poles, struggled to free himself. Panic surged through him, but instinct and training took hold. He reached for the hunting knife near his sleeping bag, fingers closing around the handle in the dark. The bear loomed over the torn tent, close enough that Leo could smell its breath, thick with decay and earth. As the bear shifted to strike again, Leo plunged the knife into its side with all the force he could muster. The blade met resistance, then sank deep. The bear roared in pain, a guttural, primal sound, and recoiled, thrashing away from the tent. Blood seeped from the wound as it turned and charged back into the forest, leaving a trail of broken branches and crushed earth in its wake. For several minutes, Leo didn't move. His heart pounded, body trembling in shock. The camp was in ruins, and Ben was gone. But the danger wasn't over. The bear could return, and Leo knew he couldn't stay. Shaking, injured, and overwhelmed by grief, Leo forced himself to act. He gathered what little gear he could salvage, then set out through the darkness. The trail was non-existent. The terrain was uneven, tangled, and unforgiving. With no moonlight to guide him, every step was a guess, each rock and root a potential trap. His arm throbbed where he'd been bruised in the collapse, and his legs ached from the strain of constant motion. 7 long miles separated him from help. The hours that followed blurred into a grim march of pain and determination. He pushed forward through undergrowth, climbed over fallen logs, and crossed icy streams. The cold air bit at his face, and his thoughts spiraled between shock and survival. Every sound, an owl, a rustling leaf, a cracking twig, made his breath catch. Just before dawn, Leo stumbled into a ranger station. Relief came like a wave. He collapsed in front of the door, his story tumbling out between gasps. Rangers acted fast. He was treated for minor wounds and extreme exhaustion, while a search team was dispatched into the forest to find the bear. Officials followed blood trails and disturbed vegetation to locate the animal later that day. The bear was still alive but clearly agitated, moving erratically and showing signs of aggression. Given its injuries and unpredictable behavior, wildlife authorities made the decision to euthanize it, prioritizing public safety. The incident prompted a deeper investigation. DNA analysis and prior reports confirmed that this bear had previously scavenged around campsites. Though it had never harmed anyone before, it had been seen rummaging through abandoned food supplies and approaching tents. Experts concluded that the bear had likely been conditioned over time by repeated access to human food, possibly from improper storage or careless campers, causing it to lose its natural wariness. Its aggressive behavior had escalated with each encounter. The tragedy sparked renewed discussion about wilderness safety. Officials emphasized that while following protocols is essential, it is not foolproof. Even well-trained hikers and campers, like Ben and Leo, could become victims when wild animals grew too accustomed to human presence. The region reinforced its safety guidelines. Rangers increased patrols, posted updated warnings at popular trailheads, and worked to educate backcountry visitors about the importance of bear-safe practices. Still, the message carried a sobering truth. In truly wild places, nothing is guaranteed. For Leo, recovery took months. Physical healing came first, but emotional wounds lingered. The memories of that night, the bear's roar, the chaos, and the silence that followed, remained vivid. He mourned the loss of his friend and carried the guilt of survival. But he also shared his story, helping others understand the stakes. The forest remained, vast, ancient, and unchanged. The place where the attack happened was left untouched, a quiet clearing now filled with absence. No markers, no signs. Just trees, earth, and silence. Nature is beautiful, but it is also powerful and indifferent. In this remote part of Montana, that truth had been carved into the dark soil, reminding anyone who dared enter that respect for the wild is not just a rule, but a matter of life and death. The relentless Arctic winter pressed down on the drifting sea ice north of Franz Josef Land, a vast frozen expanse where the wind howled like a living thing and daylight was faint, pale, and fleeting. At a small, semi-permanent weather outpost, little more than a cluster of insulated modules tethered to the shifting ice. 29-year-old technician Mikhail Petrov worked alone in the early hours. The station was his responsibility, a place of humming machines, frost-lined walls, and the bone-deep solitude of life above the Arctic Circle. On January 19, 2024, the bitter cold created a critical vulnerability. The station's insulated access tunnel, designed to prevent heat loss and block intrusion, had begun to ice over. A thick ridge of frozen buildup warped the inner seal and left the vestibule hatch slightly ajar, just wide enough to allow danger in. Mikhail, unaware of this fault, moved through the modules as usual, checking instruments and preparing meals in the station's kitchen unit. Outside, a solitary figure stalked the edge of the outpost. A large male polar bear, gaunt from winter scarcity and drawn by hunger, had wandered across the frozen expanse. Its fur, once white, was now tinged gray and matted with grime. The bear moved with the slow, deliberate steps of a creature that had traveled far without food. Its nose twitched against the wind, picking up faint traces of warmth, oil, human scent, and food. Unbeknownst to Mikhail, improperly sealed waste containers had been left outside a few days earlier during a brief power interruption. Though collected afterward, the scent lingered in the snow and air, a silent invitation. The bear followed that signal to the tunnel entrance, where the warped seal offered a rare opportunity. The animal pressed forward. Massive paws and sheer determination widened the gap until the vestibule gave way. The outer corridor filled with the sound of shifting bulkheads and scraping claws. Inside, sensors didn't trigger. The bear's approach had been slow and steady, below the alert threshold. The inner hatch buckled under pressure. With a final shove, the predator slipped into the warm interior. Surveillance footage later showed the bear's slow advance through the kitchen module. Its head swiveled, nostrils flaring. Crates of vacuum-packed food supplies were stacked near the far wall. Though sealed, they could not fully mask the scent of calories, a life-sustaining promise to a starving animal. Mikhail had just turned away from the stove when he heard the heavy thud behind him. He barely had time to react. The bear lunged, closing the distance in seconds. The confined space of the module left no room for escape. The impact was catastrophic. Equipment overturned, metal twisted, and supplies scattered. The animal lashed out with brutal efficiency, overpowering the technician almost instantly. In an adjacent module, two colleagues, Alexander and Yuri, were working late. They froze as a low growl reverberated through the ventilation shafts, followed by the unmistakable sounds of chaos. Metal slamming, objects breaking, and something heavy moving through the structure. The bear's body soon blocked the corridor between the modules, effectively trapping them inside. Every attempt to open the connecting door was met with resistance. The predator had made itself a barrier. For nearly 40 agonizing minutes, the two men remained silent, listening to the bear's movements, the scratch of claws against steel, and the creak of shifting weight on the modular floors. With no safe exit, they activated the emergency beacon and sealed the doors from their side. Outside, a blizzard had begun to gather strength. Wind screamed across the ice field, and snow thickened visibility to near zero. The satellite uplink pulsed a distress signal, picked up hours later by a regional operations hub. A rescue helicopter was scrambled, though the journey would be long and risky. Inside the outpost, the bear finally moved on, retreating through the same corridor it had entered. It vanished into the white without further destruction, leaving behind shattered equipment and a stillness that settled like frost. 5 hours later, the helicopter arrived. The landing was rough, buffeted by crosswinds, and the team had to force their way through snow-packed drifts to reach the site. Inside the kitchen module, they found the aftermath: torn supplies, damaged walls, blood on the floor. Mikhail's body lay still beside the collapsed bench. The bear was gone. The response team secured the remaining crew, evacuated the injured, and began a thorough investigation. Analysis determined that shifting sea ice had warped the station's frame more than engineers had anticipated. The design tolerances had not accounted for that level of thermal expansion and contraction. The result, a small, seemingly insignificant gap, became a critical failure point. In addition, waste management logs showed that a containment breach had occurred 3 days prior, when the generator failed. While the spill had been cleaned, residue remained frozen near the tunnel. That trace, coupled with human presence, had drawn the bear from a distance. Experts concluded that the animal had likely visited the area before, scavenging scraps and associating the station with food. This combination of environmental stress, structural vulnerability, and human oversight had created a perfect storm. The tragedy prompted swift action. Within a month, structural audits were ordered at every research station in the Arctic region. Tunnels were reinforced with double seal systems. New remote sensing equipment was installed to detect slow-moving thermal masses, such as wildlife, before breaches could occur. Waste storage policies were overhauled. Regular patrols using drones and motion sensor flares were introduced to deter curious animals. For those who worked alongside Mikhail, the impact went far deeper than protocols. He had been a calm presence, quiet, skilled, dependable. His work contributed to long-term climate monitoring efforts, helping researchers understand changing wind patterns and sea ice distribution. He had volunteered for this rotation despite the long isolation and harsh weather, knowing the importance of continuity in data collection. His loss was felt across the small, close-knit Arctic research community. Bear, its fate remains unknown. It likely returned to the wilderness, driven by hunger and instinct. In a landscape stripped of familiar food sources, the boundaries between natural behavior and desperation blur. The bear was neither rogue nor malicious, just a creature surviving in a world that had changed around it. The weather station was eventually repaired and reoccupied, though some workers requested reassignment elsewhere. The memory of what happened inside those thin metal walls stayed with them. Above the sea ice, the Arctic wind continues to blow. The outpost still stands, its walls thicker now, its systems smarter. But the lesson remains as sharp as the cold. In a place ruled by extremes, even one overlooked crack can become an invitation to disaster. The wild does not forgive complacency. And in the quiet moments between snow squalls, when the world falls still again, those who remain can't help but listen for the sound of footsteps on ice. The quiet suburban neighborhood of Asheville, North Carolina, was not the kind of place where danger lurked behind picket fences and trimmed hedges. It was a peaceful patchwork of tree-lined streets and neatly manicured lawns, where children played freely and neighbors chatted over garden fences. There was a rhythm to life there, predictable, safe, familiar. Yet on September 18, 2024, that sense of security was violently shattered. 12-year-old Rachel Davis was enjoying a warm, sunny afternoon in her backyard. The sky was cloudless, the cicadas buzzing faintly in the trees. Rachel kicked off her shoes and ran barefoot through the soft grass, chasing a stray ball that had rolled toward the edge of the yard. To her, the fenced space was her private kingdom, a sanctuary of trampoline games, imaginary adventures, and sun-soaked freedom. The wooden fence that encircled the yard stood tall and sturdy, a clear boundary between her world and the woods beyond. Unbeknownst to Rachel, something dark and powerful had crossed that boundary. A black bear, drawn by the scent of food from overflowing trash bins left unsecured 2 houses down, had been prowling the area for weeks. Trail cameras, installed by wary residents, had recorded the bear's late-night visits, methodical, patient, and increasingly bold. It had learned the layout of yards, memorized the location of trash cans, and grown accustomed to the sounds and smells of human life. With every successful raid, it lost a bit more of its natural fear. Rachel's movement, quick, sudden, childlike, caught the bear's attention just as it lingered near the fence. She darted after her ball, arms outstretched and laughter on her lips. In that instant, instinct overwhelmed the bear's hesitation. It surged forward with terrifying speed, muscles rippling beneath its thick black coat, claws extended, jaws wide. In one motion, the bear lunged over the fence and charged into the yard. Its jaws clamped down on Rachel's leg, teeth sinking into muscle and flesh with horrifying force. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and blinding. She screamed, a high, piercing sound of agony and terror that rang through the neighborhood like an alarm. The bear raked its claws across her back, tearing through her shirt and into her skin in a frenzy of confusion and instinctual aggression. Neighbors, stunned by the sound, burst from their homes. Some called 911, voices shaking with panic, while others rushed toward the fence with brooms, rakes, and shovels, shouting and banging anything they could find. The bear, startled by the sudden wave of noise and motion, released Rachel and turned sharply. With surprising agility for its size, it climbed over the fence and disappeared into the bordering woods, the silence it left behind as chilling as the attack itself. Rachel lay on the ground, her body trembling in shock, her leg bleeding heavily, her back burning from the deep gashes. Her parents reached her within seconds, dropping to their knees in panic. They tried to calm her, pressing cloths against the wounds, whispering reassurances through their own tears. The yard, once a place of joy, had become a scene of chaos and trauma. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Rachel was rushed to the hospital, where doctors quickly assessed her injuries: deep puncture wounds from the bite, multiple claw lacerations, and signs of early shock. She was immediately given intravenous antibiotics and pain management, while a surgical team worked to clean and close the wounds. Her injuries were serious but not life-threatening, thanks to the quick response of neighbors and emergency personnel. As Rachel recovered, wildlife officers launched a full-scale response. Using trail camera footage and neighborhood reports, they mapped the bear's recent movements. It had visited at least 4 homes that month, rifling through garbage and exploring backyards. The officers tracked it to a wooded ravine less than 2 miles from Rachel's home. 2 days after the attack, the bear was located, tranquilized, and safely removed from the area. It was a healthy male, roughly 3 years old, but its behavior was troubling. Its claws were worn from climbing fences, and its fur was streaked with food residue and garbage grime. After a thorough assessment, officials relocated the animal to a remote wilderness zone hundreds of miles away, where it would no longer come into contact with people. The attack shook the Asheville community deeply. What had seemed like a rare curiosity, a bear wandering the edges of suburbia, was now a threat that had crossed the line into human space. City leaders held emergency meetings and quickly passed new ordinances requiring bear-resistant trash bins with locking lids. Waste pickup schedules were tightened, and enforcement measures included fines for residents who failed to comply. Educational campaigns followed. Flyers, social media posts, and town hall meetings emphasized the importance of not feeding wildlife, securing attractants, and reporting sightings promptly. Schools hosted presentations on coexistence with wild animals, and local news outlets ran stories urging families to reassess their backyard habits. It was no longer enough to rely on fences and assumptions. Awareness had become essential. Rachel's recovery was steady but difficult. She endured multiple follow-up appointments, physical therapy sessions, and nightmares that woke her in the dark. Her parents considered counseling to help her process the trauma, and she returned to school with a limp and a quiet, more reserved demeanor. Her classmates treated her with sympathy and awe. Many had never imagined something so wild could happen in their own neighborhood. Her family, though grateful she had survived, could no longer feel safe in their home. After weeks of deliberation, they made the heartbreaking decision to move across town, to a neighborhood further from forest edges and known wildlife corridors. It was a painful choice, but one they felt necessary for peace of mind. Rachel's physical wounds faded with time, though a few scars remained. The emotional ones lingered longer: fear at sudden noises, wariness in the yard, a sense of vulnerability that hadn't existed before. But over time, with love and patience, she began to reclaim pieces of her old life. She learned more about wildlife, about bear behavior and conservation, and even began volunteering with an animal education group that visited local schools. The black bear in the backyard became a story told often, not one of blame or vengeance, but of hard lessons and hard truths. It was a reminder that even in the heart of suburbia, nature does not always obey human boundaries. When carelessness, complacency, and shrinking wilderness collide, the results can be swift and dangerous. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. Trash bins were locked. Compost was removed. People looked more carefully before letting pets outside or letting children roam freely. Life resumed, but with a quiet undercurrent of caution. The wild had shown its face, and no one could pretend it wasn't there anymore. The picket fences still stood. The lawns were still green. But behind them now lived a sharper understanding that coexistence requires more than comfort. It demands respect.